Taki is Bang Dream its MyGO's most underappreciated character. I want to start by very briefly going over the other four members of MyGO and where they stand in terms of popularity and focus in the series, compared to Taki especially. I'm going to ignore mujica for now, since the anime is coming up, and there's a whole other can of worms we can open once we've watched that. I mean, like, what is even going on over here with the Taki economy? It is insane. Anyway, Anon and Tomy are obvious favourites for many. They're the protagonists after all. We get pretty much the full scope of Anon's character arc in the single core, and while Tomy has some stuff to settle, in mujica, we see her become a human, so to say, and tightly grasp the reins of her own life. To be frank, if you dislike Tomy, you just get a long, hard look at yourself in the mirror. On to Soyo, who's the driving force of the conflict in the anime. Not you. She's scheming, gatekeeping, gaslighting, girl bossing, girl failing, etc, etc, and if you like her or not, she sure makes the story interesting and one of those characters you may appreciate more on a rewatch. I was actually very close to doing a video on her instead, and may well do so in the future. Regardless, she gets a lot of focus in the anime, and even outside the anime. The colours and beauty in these raindrops event in the game has some fantastic Soyo characterization. I mean, just look at these lines from the event. Now, Taki probably wasn't the most underappreciated MyGO character in terms of the amount of attention given to them, until the MyGO recap movie dropped. Part 1 of the MyGO recap movie, titled Spring Sunshine Lost Cat, as you may have guessed from the title already knew, focuses heavily on Rana. It cuts content from the main series, mainly Saki related stuff, to focus on Rana and specifically her backstory of her grandma, the owner, and space shutting down. I mean, Rana was a very lovable character even prior to the movie, mostly there for comic relief, but not without her own interesting character quirks and motives, especially in relation to Tomy. But the movie really came and beat down any chance Taki had of being more popular and appreciated than the other members. Now don't get me wrong, Taki isn't a character that's been swept under the rug by the fanbase. Amongst the dedicated fans, she's very much beloved. She's the only character of a fan-made visual novel on Steam after all. But for a more casual watcher, such as someone who watched the show while it was airing and hasn't revisited it since, she is probably the most forgettable of the 5 members. And if you weren't affected by the MyGO mind virus like myself and many others, you probably don't care for her that much. Majority of her story and characterization is in the background of the show, rarely ever actually brought to attention or are just inferences that require more reading into and are easy to miss. I wanted to make this video not to change your mind, but just to shine a light on an undervalued member of the cast and why I think she deserves more attention and love, and not that it really matters anyway whether she's popular or not, but it's just an excuse to talk about her. Taki's focus episode is episode 6. After episode 5 and Soyo's scheming aside, the band on the surface are actually in a pretty comfortable spot following Anon opening up to Tomy and their determination to confront their problems and be lost together. Taki decides to write the music for Tomy's new song she wrote. We see her working hard through the night and skipping school in her room, which is rather plain and void of any personality, but it's practical, and a detail I'll come back to later. While the song is praised as warm by Tomy, the end product doesn't accommodate for Anon being a newbie at the guitar, and also doesn't really factor in Rana, who regardless can probably just improvise the thing, but that wouldn't satisfy Taki. She writes and rewrites the song due to Anon's problems, and Rana just coming in as she pleases. It must be perfect, as that is how Sakiko would have done it. Taki, on the other hand, struggles with communicating with the other band members. She clashes with Rana, who turns up as she pleases, fails to take into consideration Anon's skill level, and even reprimands Soyo for being out of practice. Once the other members offer to help Taki with the task, that is when she snaps. Taki doesn't even walk Tomy home like she usually does, and I think this act, or lack of act, from Taki is what ends up hurting Taki the most. As she tries her best to reach an ideal she can't reach, she also ends up hurting the one person she's trying to protect. From episode 3, as well as a line in this episode, you also find out about Taki's older sister Maki, who is well respected and the initial reason Saki reached out to Taki in the first place when forming Cryshik.
吹奏楽部の部長さんやりながら地域のオーケストラに参加したり、コンクールで1位取ったり。私もそのご縁でお声掛けしましたの。
Reason for Taki's involvement in Crytek, and ultimately the reason Taki meets Tomy, is because of her older sister. It's no wonder Taki strives so high when these expectations are set on her before anyone has even met her. And naturally, she wants to meet these expectations, because you don't want to disappoint people, but more importantly, they're the reason why she meets the one person in her life she treasures the most. It's unfortunate because we really don't know explicitly much about Taki's relationship with Maki, whether they get along or not, or how Maki feels about Taki. The one time Taki goes to Maki in the anime is as a last resort in episode 9.
お姉ちゃん、聞きたいことがあるんだけど。
It's obvious it takes a lot of courage for her to knock on that door, and even Soyo comments on resorting to asking her sister. That tells enough about their relationship. Saki, on the other hand, we've seen firsthand just how impressive I guess she can be. Her level of charisma is off the charts. She's super talented, can compose music, sing, play the piano, as well as write scripts for the live intermissions, and her creative direction when it comes to Ave Mujica's entire aesthetic and style is something to marvel at. Also worth mentioning, she comes from a rich background, went to a rich girls' school, and has that Ojo-sama air to her, and the characters we follow, including Taki, still think she's rich and has a connection to an esteemed family. Sakiko, especially the Saki that Taki knows, has that sort of charm that affects everyone around her. So I'm sorry Taki, but you lost before you even started by idolising Saki. But then again, so are so many other characters in this series. Back to the episode, and this classroom shot really makes us aware and drives home of just how overwhelmed and fed up Taki is with herself. She's stuck in place while the whole world moves around her and time moves on. Taki truly ends up in a slump because of her hurting Tomy and snapping in front of the band like that and showing such weakness. And even when confronted about it at her school by Anon and Tomy, she runs away, the same thing she accused Anon of in the previous episode. But it really doesn't take much to bring Taki back. Tomy offers her some band-aids, which to her is reconciliation. Not that Tomy ever felt hurt by Taki's actions on the train. She's the kindest soul in the series, so much so that she's able to empathise with everyone and anyone to the point where she fails to see any malintent from others and often ends up blaming herself instead. And this episode basically puts Taki's inferiority complex on full blast towards both her older sister Maki and Sakiko. It's apparent to anyone paying attention, and alongside her comedic retorts to Anon and her cuter moments with Tomy is what gets the most focus on the surface regarding her character. Her own pride and refusal to be vulnerable means she doesn't have anyone to open up about this to, and the one possible person, Tomy, she wouldn't want to burden with such meaningless problems in her mind. Though it's not like we haven't seen her open up before. Soyo, in particular, she actually feels pretty comfortable venting to, as she's witnessed Soyo's ugly sides and her pure sides. She has a completely unbiased stance towards her and even empathises with Soyo's selfishness. It's the build-up of small things related to her inferiority complex that affects Taki the most, but it's equally the small gestures or lines from one person she cares about the most that will allow her to get over it, temporarily that is. And that's about the extent of Taki's episode, and her entire conflict can feel a little rushed and brushed over by the end of it. That's because it just hasn't been truly resolved. Think of the conflict between Nozomi and Mizore in Hibike Season 2, and how the Liz and the Bluebird movie is actually when we see a resolution between them. Oh, how the people yearn for a Taki and Tomy spin-off movie in Liz and the Bluebird fashion. Taki's dynamic and relationship with Tomy is one that I think is overlooked or reduced to a cute easy ship to sell the series with some Yuri. But under the surface, there's so many complex emotions on display, especially from Taki's side. I said how it was over before it even started in regards to Taki idolising Saki, but in a similar way, the person that saved her, Tomy, deserves all her admiration and is the one person able to forgive and embrace her weaknesses. Tomy's ability to be vulnerable and unabashedly herself without a mask, both through her lyrics and her singing on stage, is what Taki fell in love with. Taki saw in Tomy someone who could accept her weaknesses wholeheartedly in contrast to everyone else who holds her at such a high standard because of external factors. However, as the show points out, Taki's admiration and such strong feelings for Tomy aren't always to her benefit, as we see when she tries to bring Umiri into the band after Soyo's departure in episode 9. There are times when Taki actually fails to consider Tomy's feelings, and at times her care for Tomy can be self-serving, but, emphasis on the but, this does not mean that Taki's feelings for Tomy are ingenuine or overall cause the both of them harm. I've seen plenty of these claims before how Taki's feelings towards Tomy are toxic and that she needs to get over them to move on and develop as a character. And this was even a stance I was somewhat leaning towards before reading more deeply into Taki's character. These aren't feelings that she needs to overcome or evolve past, they're feelings she needs to accept and embrace. To reject these feelings would be to completely reject herself and the reason she's still alive today. It would only cause her more harm and would also cause Tomy more harm for Taki to detach from her like that. She would end up blaming herself and possibly spiral again like during the events of MyGO and Crytek. The show itself also backs up this idea through what's essentially the core message of the anime, forgiveness and acceptance. Anon joins MyGO to look good, Soyo joins MyGO to get Kreisig back together, Rana joins MyGO to get over losing space, and Taki joins MyGO to play with Tomy. All these differing intentions and motivations inevitably clash, but in the end they're all forgiven and accepted by each person. Anon still wants to be the centre of attention within MyGO, Soyo vows to Tomy else she probably won't ever be able to forget about Kreisig, Rana is fickle in nature, just turning up whenever she pleases, and Taki still priorities Tomy above anyone else in the band. But all these genuine feelings aren't overcome, they're forgiven and accepted while still being confronted respectively. Likewise, Taki's feelings for Tomy must be confronted and accepted by herself for her to be able to go on. I feel like Tomy's feelings towards Taki is a whole video in itself, so I'll gloss over them slightly, but just to say that I think a lot of people underestimate Tomy's affection towards Taki and how the relationship isn't as one-sided as it may seem. At the end of the day, Tomy and Taki are the writer and composer duo of MyGO's songs, much like Riko and Sakiko are for mujica, and we sure as hell know they got a lot going on. And parallels between the bands are ever present and important in the show, so these roles aren't just handed out thoughtlessly. MyGO's songs are the culmination of the band's emotions, but most notably, Taki and Tomy are the two members that are bringing these emotions together in the form of the song. They have an inexplicable dynamic and way of communication through these creative processes that produce some of the most raw and emotional music you'll hear from the franchise. I think this fact alone is enough to validate the genuineness of their relationship and bond, even if the show doesn't lean into it as much. What's even more interesting is that Taki fell for Tomy because of her vulnerability, but simultaneously adores the band Afterglow because of their powerful and indomitable presence on stage. While she strives to become a perfect invincible version of herself, she finds endless solace in the fact that someone can accept her as someone who is anything but that. The weaknesses that Tomy displays make her flawless to Taki in a similar way that Afterglow's unyielding image and presence on stage is flawless to her, and Sakiko's talents and kindness are flawless to her, and of course her own sister's reputation and achievements do the same. If Taki was able to confront these idolizations and realize that they aren't in fact flawless or as perfect as they seem, she would be able to come to love her imperfect self more, but this would be tearing down what is essentially her entire worldview. The contradiction of idealizing a seemingly flawless person and finding consolation in someone that accepts their weakness reminds me of another character from another series I love, Nanami Toko from Bloom Into You. Her entire deal, without spoiling much, is essentially similar to Taki's in that she has an unrealistic ideal she dreams to reach, that also happens to be their older sister, but is provided comfort by being her weak self in front of you. An interesting angle Bloom Into You covers is how different people perceive you and how the incredible older sister that Toko admires so much isn't actually seen as that incredible by people closer to her, which is further explored in regard to Toko herself when she has to eventually confront her own identity crisis. These realistic contradictions within characters to me are super compelling because it seems hard to write and pull off without the characters just coming across as inconsistent, but these opposite parts of us and the hypocritical contradictory parts of ourselves are so human and real. I think it'd be great if MyGO and mujica do something similar with Maki, and it's revealed that despite everyone around Taki singing such high praises of her sister and consequently passing those expectations on to Taki, Maki isn't actually this flawless person. I'd love to see how Taki would deal with this revelation and how it would cause her to question her own goals. Also, two small details in regards to Taki's character are her screensaver and a frame on the wall in her room. Her screensaver says, "What will you do today?" of course with a picture of a panda, and in her room there's a frame that says, "Make your dreams happen," that was revealed to us in the official background art releases. Of course, these are both motivational quotes and go to show just how serious Taki is about goals to reach her ideals, though it also shows how mentally draining it must be for her to remind herself every day that she wakes up, and whenever she uses her phone, that the her in the now is not good enough. But on the other hand, the direct nature of the quotes makes Taki feel as if she's in control of her own success and has full self-control and efficiency compared to constantly being measured against the success of other people. Yet the very success she seeks is born from these individuals, another example of Taki's complexities through contradictions. Though it is important to note that not all of Taki's problems are a product of her inferiority complex. Said complex often enhances other problems she has and is further reinforced by them. It's evident Taki hadn't had a close relationship with anyone prior to Kreisig. She closed herself off to the world for reasons mostly unknown to us. I think you could read into the way she acts socially and the general almost constant state of being in defense mode that she could have been bullied when she was younger. It would explain her blunt nature and disdain towards essentially anyone that isn't Tomy, as well as her moving schools. Kreisig was truly a place of comfort to her, much like it was for Soyo and Tomy. We see how emotionally vulnerable she could be at the end of the concert in episode 3. Kreisig was an outlet for her emotions, one that she didn't get back until MyGO formed and episode 10 happened. Yet we see very little, if any, reactions from her regarding the breakup, especially compared to Soyo and Tomy, and how it affected her, especially her connections and her relationship with other members falling apart. However, one significant relationship is that with Umiri. Honestly, one of the most natural pairings in the show, their banter and exchanges feel so real and genuine. but with Umiri undoubtedly about to go through it as timorous with having mujica, Taki may be someone Umiri ends up turning to. Umiri's whole thing with the 30 bands, her short stint in MyGO, and a lot of dialogue as timorous in the Mujica live intermissions show us how she's unable to make any meaningful connections and is thrown away and picked up again by other people as they please. Taki pretty much did exactly that to her in favour of prioritising staying with Tomy, even going as far as saying to Umiri, "We don't need you anymore." Taki has unquestionably contributed towards Umiri's mental anguish, and we will most likely see it spill out at some point in the Mujica anime. I just hope Taki is there for her and that Umiri can feel like Taki is someone she can actually turn to during this time. I know I've just rambled on about Taki's complex emotions and conflicts, but on the surface, to me anyway, Taki feels a bit like a comic relief character. A lot of her interaction and dialogue are being snappy and annoyed at Anon, or in contrast being soft and gentle with Tomy. Ignoring her focus episode, she actually has a fair few introspective and vulnerable moments, more so than anyone else, barring obviously Tomy, who we get entire episodes dedicated towards. In episode 4, on the bridge, where Taki is surprised Tomy wanted to be in a band again and opens up about not being able to graduate as planned, another little nugget of information that isn't expanded on regarding Taki.
そっか。高校羽岡なんだ。うん。私もそのまま上がってたら一緒に通えてたかな。
In episode 5, on Ring Staircase, she basically lays it all bare to Soyo on how she feels towards Tomy, but when encouraged by Soyo, she as usual would prefer to maintain the safe distance she feels comfortable at.
こんな私でも生きてていいんだって。
滝ちゃん。
だから私またバンドやるってなって嬉しくて。ともりも同じと思ってた。けど
それともりちゃんに言えばいいのに。
これは私のエゴだから。
On Ring Staircase in episode 10, where she actually opens up to Tomy, who closes the distance between them and entering Taki's section of heart. It's important that this happens in episode 10, an episode all about changing something that's shown visually through the uniforms and key locations.
何考えてるか全然わかんなかったけど。でも、ともりの歌を聴いてわかった。
滝ちゃん、来てくれてありがとう。
And at Soyo's apartment in episode 11, Taki apologises to Soyo and reveals how she knew about Soyo's circumstances and still used her to keep playing with Tomy.
気づいてて、私も利用してた。だから、私も最悪。
While Taki's actions aren't anywhere near as malicious as Soyo's, they were still selfish, especially since she was aware of the pain Soyo was experiencing, but confronting it would put the stability of the band and hence her connection and relationship with Tomy at risk. Taki really didn't need to apologise, but after the events of episode 9, how she hurt Tomy followed by episode 10, it allowed her to face her own mistakes and take that first step towards proper reconciliation and communication. It's probably worth mentioning, but almost all the times Taki is introspective and confronts her own feelings, they are in elevated locations with overlooking views. Now, does this actually mean anything? I'd like to think so, because this is the type of show where every shot and line has reason and intent behind it. It's a fictional work after all, so these things are crafted with a certain intention in mind. Maybe Taki in these locations doesn't feel as restricted and is allowed to be more honest with herself. She is literally and figuratively above the world and life that has troubled her so, and hence allowed to breathe properly, which brings me nicely onto my next point, which is the Breathing Next to You event in the game. This game event focuses on Taki and Rana. Look, they're friends again. In the event story, Taki is frustrated at Rana's fickle nature regarding the band and how inconsistently she shows up for practice, and when she does, is insistent on doing another live. She tries her best to stabilise MyGO, make sure songs are up to a certain standard, that everyone is arriving on time and putting necessary effort in, and in general acting like the leader of the band, which leads Anon to call her a club captain. However, this leads to Taki remembering club members at her middle school, comparing her to Maki and expecting great things from her.
いつまで経っても消えてくれない記憶。やめて。私はそんなんじゃない。私のことは誰より私が分かってる。
Taki actively looks for Rana by visiting her club at school, where she's met with everyone being pretty lax about her attitude in the club. Soyo also advises Taki to relax if we really are doing it for the rest of our lives, and that this is just how MyGO is. Taki retorts and wants to do things her way like she always has done, as that is what provides her the most comfort and safety, and it's simply what she is used to doing. Taki apologises to Tomori and mentions how she can't do it like Saki did, but Tomori suggests Taki sings to get her feelings and ideas across, as that's how MyGO was formed in the end. Taki loosens up at the suggestion. She doesn't sing, as that isn't how Taki is able to communicate, but she's reminded of why she's in MyGO in the first place and the reason she stands, or well, sits, on the stage.
それで迷子になれた。だからタキちゃんも歌ってみる。
ごめん。ちょっとなんか気が抜けた。心配かけてごめん。それからありがとう。
Soyo tells Anon about Maki and how Taki has high standards and an ideal to reach. Anon sympathises with Taki, mentioning how having someone so amazing so close to you and as a role model causes lots of pressure, and how that ideal starts to become the normal, and how exhausting and anxiety inducing that can be. This insight from Anon is interesting because she's always strived to impress people and be held to a higher standard, but unlike Taki, it's come from a more selfish desire and a need to be recognised and validated. Taki, on the other hand, has practically had that way of life and standard ingrained into her due to the expectations set by Maki and Sakiko. Taki doesn't want to impress others, she just does this because it's the only way she knows how. If she doesn't meet those unrealistic standards, then what does she have left?
それで今みたいに突っ走ってるって感じ？かもしれないってだけ。タキちゃん、あんまり自分のこと話さないから。なんかそれ、私だったら結構嫌かも。だってさ、すっごいプレッシャーじゃない？そんなお手本みたいな人が家族にいるの。なんていうか、すごいのが当たり前になっちゃって、普通に自信なくすと思うし、自分も頑張んなきゃって焦っちゃいそう。
Taki finds Rana, where surprisingly, Rana opens up to her about how the Livehouse space was her home to her and how she was able to breathe naturally there. After it closed down, she says she couldn't breathe, as there was no place for her to belong, until Tomy came along and allowed her to breathe again on stage. Taki resonates deeply with that, and thinks about the warmth and comfort Tomy provides her that allows her to be herself, and not the Taki that can't reach that ideal. She recognises the selfish reason she's in MyGO, to play with Tomy, and uses that to make a deal with Rana, who is also doing the same thing, to provide Rana with better air to breathe in return for her cooperation with the band.
面白い女の子。一緒にライブするの楽しい。思いっきり息できる。
ああ、なんかそれわかる。そうだよ。私にはそれしかできない。わかってるのに。わかりたくなくて。この歌はどうしてこんなにも胸を打つの？どうして私の中の言葉を救ってくれるの？救ってくれるの？ともりの歌をステージで隣でその瞬間だけ私になれて。
The Breathing Next to You story creates a connection between Taki and Rana beyond the comedic dynamic that's been established in the anime. Taki is able to use her admiration for Tomy as a way to connect with someone else and as a way to benefit others. This is important because Tomy is a weakness of Taki's. She's often emotionally vulnerable around her and biased towards her, states that don't align with the ideal she wishes to reach, which can not only cause Taki harm but also Tomy harm herself. So for her to be able to benefit others through this admiration is huge for her. In this story, she's been able to turn her weakness into a strength.
今よりもっといい空気吸わせてやる。ああ、つまりさ、お前が協力するならこれまでよりいいライブにできる。いや、する。そういうのでどう？
いいじゃん。
This story could have only worked with Rana and Taki, not only because of their feelings towards Tomy, but because of their opposite approach to these same feelings. Taki will not indulge in her feelings towards Tomy, she will not advance their relationship, nor will she back further away. she's found a safe place to exist along Tomori's side and will revel in that until she is forced not to. On the other hand, Rana's entire personality revolves around what she wants and how she feels in that moment. If she wants to practice, she'll do that. If she wants to eat a matcha parfait, she'll do that. If she wants to play alongside Tomori and allow herself to breathe, she will, and she'll do all these things without feeling bad or guilty about it, unlike Taki. In fact, Taki's devotion and such strong feelings towards Tomori remind me a little of Adachi and her feelings towards Shimamura in Adachi and Shimamura. The biggest difference between the two is how Adachi will indulge in these emotions, like all the fucking time, whereas Taki chooses to lock them away. What's interesting about Adachi and Shimamura is that these feelings, while originally being framed as something that Adachi has to overcome, end up instead being embraced. Adachi tries to make new friends and live life without thinking about Shimamura as much, and it literally proves to be impossible. But luckily, well, less to do with luck and more to do with fate, the one person she does adore so much ends up accepting all those feelings and they're able to be together. I'm unsure if Taki will be quite as lucky with Sakiko involved, but it's an interesting parallel and example of how such extreme and intense emotions can be handled in these circumstances as opposed to the typical approach of developing past and growing out of them. I want to end this video by talking about Taki's cover song that's on the official MyGO YouTube channel, sung incredibly well by her oh so talented voice actress Hayashi Koko. The song covered is called Shiori, meaning bookmark, by Creep Hip, not to be confused with Shiori by MyGO, which is the official ending song of the anime. And if the series scriptwriter Yuniko Ayana Sensei tweeting about the idea of Taki singing it in front of Tomori doesn't convince you enough it's a song from Taki directed towards Tomori, the lyrics sure will. I want to clarify that since this is a cover song, it obviously was not written for Taki, but I'll speak about it as if it was, since it was the chosen song especially as Taki's song to sing. The lyrics talk about an almost half-hearted relationship and the feelings of having to say goodbye to it even though the distance kept between them was intentful. Taki sings about while she's too busy reading the room around her, she's forgetting about the story she originally started with Tomori. While having to deal with her complexes towards her sister and Saki and essentially just struggling to come to terms with her own weaknesses and identity, Taki loses sight of what originally gave her life and purpose in Tomori. He yearns to return to that story, singing, "Do you think I'll be able to settle things just with simple outlines?" and "Right now we can still do it again, this thought dances in the wind." But believes returning to it would be illogical, singing, "Even if I start from the middle, our story still makes no sense." Taki sings about her avoidant nature towards Tomori and the safe distance she's created, saying, "It's perfect when we have to look down, while it blossoms on the ground," as well as a verse that essentially sums up Taki's feelings towards Tomori. "The first time I called you by your name, and seeing that face turn back, just with that I become a little happier, and hurriedly I lock myself up." Just to keep a certain distance from Tomori, so as to not burden her or confront herself and therefore stabilising their relationship, forever unchanging and unmoving. However, I'm sure Taki will be able to confront these emotions and face Tomori head on. She's shown positive development in the Breathing Next to You event story and has consistently shown taking steps forward and looking out confidently in official art. The other mujica anime will kick lots of things into emotions for lots of characters, and outside other mujica members themselves, Taki will for sure be one of them. Thank you guys so much for watching all the way to the end, and let me ramble a bit about a character I really love that deserves more attention from both the fandom and the show itself. I was going to talk a bit about Taki's parallels with Wika, but most of it will just be regurgitating what Sign wrote about them, so please go and read that and check out that incredible translation work for Ave Mujica. I'll leave you with the final verses from Taki's cover of Shiori, as well as this tweet from the scriptwriter for MyGO, Yuniko Ayana Sensei, reading, "Taki-chan, until Tomori's heart catches up with yours, tell her your love unabashedly by looking her in the eyes. If words are too hard, then hold her hand firmly in yours." Thank you so much for listening.
この気持ちもいつか手軽に持ち運べる文庫になって懐かしくなるからそれまでは待って地面に水をやる桜散る桜散るひらひら舞う文字が